Louise Erdrich. Louise Erdrich was born as Karen Louise Erdrich in 1954 in Little Falls, Minnesota. She was the oldest of 7 children, and her father was German American while her mother was Chippewa. Like many of her characters, she was raised Catholic and deeply influenced by a mix of cultures. Her mother French Ojibwe, her father German American. As I read one of her interviews, she explained that she kept writing because she grew up as a Catholic, and the one place you're allowed to be emotional and to really talk about yourself is in the confessional, and in the darkness of the confessional where you are safe. And the priest is supposed to not be a conduit just to God. You're not. But as I'm from a small town, it sometimes astonishes me what I'd read on paper, because I don't mean to have written some of those things. And sometimes mothers come up to me in my daughter's grade school and they look at me and say, "It must be unique living in your head. How could you read that? How could you write that?" I also have another quote here from The Plague of Doves that I think exemplifies her mix of cultures growing up and figuring out who she is as a writer. When we are young, the words are scattered all around us. As they are assembled by experience, so are we, sentence by sentence, until a story takes shape. Also, Erdrich attended Dartmouth College from 1972 to 1976. She was part of the first class of women to be admitted and graduate from the college. During her freshman year at the college, she met her future husband, Michael Doris. While taking Doris's class, she began to look into her own ancestry, which birthed her inspiration for her literary work, including poems, short stories, and novels. Social. One theme is stolen identities, stolen often by men in their lives, and especially by the husbands in their lives. Erdrich and Doris were married in 1981 and raised 3 adopted children as well as 3 biological children. In 1995, they were divorced, and in 1997, Doris committed suicide. Following his suicide, Erdrich released The Antelope Wife in 1988. I have a quote here from her book, The Bingo Palace, which I think depicts the suicide and unhealthy marriage that she was in with Doris. It reads, "Cold sinks in, there to stay, and people they'll leave you, sure. There's no return to what was, and no way back. There's just emptiness all around, and you in it, like singing up from the bottom of a well. Like nothing else, until you harm yourself, until you are a mad dog biting yourself for sympathy, because there is no relenting." Also, her childhood was spent in a community of, she explains in an interview that her childhood was spent in a community of storytellers, which influenced her work and its concern with narrative. Jacklight celebrates family bonds and ties of kinship, offer autobiographical meditations, dramatic monologues, and love poetry, as well as showing the influence of Ojibwa myths and legends. Another quote here from the Love Medicine. Society is like this card game here, cousin. We got dealt our hand before we were even born, and as we grow, we have to play as best we can. Also, in her interview with Bill Moyer, she states, "I live on the margin of just about everything. I'm a marginal person, and I think that is where I've become comfortable. I'm marginally there in my native life. I can do as much as I can, but I'm always German too, and I'm always a mother. That's my first identity. But I'm always a writer too. I have to write. I have to be an artist, I have a very fractured inner life, I think." Political. In The Plague of Doves, the narrative focuses on the historical lynching of 4 Native people wrongly accused of murdering a Caucasian family, as well as the effect of this injustice on the current generations. Her work goes beyond portraying contemporary Native American life as descendants of a politically dominated people to explore the great universal questions. These questions of identity, pattern versus randomness, and the meaning of life itself. The poems in Jacklight center on the conflict between Native and non-Native cultures. Economical. Growing up, her father would pay her a nickel for every story she wrote. During her career of writing, she also had numerous jobs, some of which were a waitress, a lifeguard, the only single woman at a construction site. And also in her interview with Bill Moyer, she explained, settling into that job and becoming comfortable with an urban community, which is very different from the reservation community, gave me another reference point. There were lots of people with mixed blood, lots of people who had their own confusions. I realized that this was part of my life. She used all these different skills she learned, as well as experience she gained along the way from many of her stories. Historical. Erdrich explores Native American themes and traditions in her works, with major characters representing both sides of her heritage, again, which was the German American as well as the Chippewa. She explores the cultural issues facing many modern-day Native Americans and mixed heritage Americans, like herself. Through her characters, she explores universal family life cycles while also communicating a sense of the changes and loss involved in the 20th century Native American experience. Literary. Erdrich is an American author, writer of novels, poetry, children's books featuring Native American characters and settings. Erdrich began her mature literary career as a poet, and the evidence of her origins can be found in her lyrical prose, in her deft use of imagery and metaphor, and in her employment within the fiction of pattern designs and recurring motifs. She began to move from poetry to fiction in 1980 when she became conscious of the narrative elements at work in her poems. There is some crossover in between the novels and poetry. For example, the poem A Love Medicine explores similar themes to Erdrich's first novel, Love Medicine, in addition to sharing its name. She has visited and revisited the North Dakota lands where her ancestors met and mingled, representing Chippewa experience in the Anglo-American literary tradition. Erdrich has won many awards, which I have listed here, including a Pushcart Prize in Poetry, the World Fantasy Award for the Antelope Wife in 1999, an honorary doctorate from the University of North Dakota. However, she opposed it due to the fact of North Dakota's fighting Sioux mascot. Also, more awards listed, including the National Book Award for Fiction for the Roundhouse in 2012. And in 2014, she was awarded the Dayton Literary Peace Prize.